Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Gesho. A perfectly imperfect beginning to the sitting this morning and to the talk. So, how are you? How do you feel right now? Maybe you feel great. You slept well, had your coffee, your apartment is warm, all is right in the world. You probably want this feeling to continue. Or perhaps you feel a little tightness in your chest. You're just noticing it now that I mention it. I can imagine Gesho might have been feeling a little tightness in her chest earlier today. But maybe you've been worried about something for the last few weeks, kind of into a background level of anxiety. And you know this tightness is how your body responds to stress. You start to breathe into that tightness. You'd like it to go away. Or perhaps you're a little bored. You're kind of indifferent about whether you want to sit through another Dharma talk this morning, and you find yourself suppressing a yawn. Our practice is to be present with whatever arises, and inevitably feelings arise. We refer to the 5 skandhas in the Heart Sutra: sensation, conception, perception, discrimination, awareness. And the first of these is sensation. Our senses and sense objects and objects of mind affect how we perceive and are present in the world. And of course, as practitioners, we probably know how we can allow our feelings and attachment to feelings, our thoughts and attachments to thoughts, to rule our lives. So I know how certain circumstances can trigger strong emotions that cloud my judgment. For some of us, certainly for me, conflict can trigger very strong emotions. Actually, a friend mentioned to me last week that when she is in a situation where there is conflict, she has panic attacks. She starts breathing rapidly and sometimes just has to get out of the situation. For someone else, conflict might trigger anger. For some of us, it's fight. For some of us, it's flight. If we're human, we have emotions, passions, desire, and aversion. How do we practice with difficult emotions? How can we transcend them? The first line of Komyozo Zanmai, which was our last study text, is do not be pulled around by states of mind or objects. A few weeks ago, after winter session, Ryoshin asked about the Japanese tradition, which we continue, of ringing 108 bells on New Year's Eve. And the ringing of the bell, I did a little web research and I discovered that the ringing of the bell symbolizes the wish that we will be free of the 108 worldly passions in the new year. And Fusho gave a lovely talk a few weeks ago about inviting the bell to ring. And if you haven't heard it, I encourage you to go back and listen to it. And of course, our minds all work differently. Fusho gave a lovely talk about her experience ringing the bell, and I wanted to know where the number 108 came from. So in my web research, I found this little thing that I posted, which said that there are 6 senses: sight, hearing, smell, taste, touch, and mind. We chant the negation of these in the Heart Sutra: no eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind. So there are 6 senses. 6. And there are 3 ways of experiencing each sense: positive, pleasant feelings; negative, feelings that are unpleasant; and neutral, kind of meh, doesn't excite me, doesn't bother me. So 3 times 6 gives rise to 18 feelings. And we can either crave or be averse to each of these 18 feelings in the past, present, or future. So 6 times 3 times 2 times 3 is 108. So this was on a random web page, and it's kind of interesting if you think about it. I mean, are you clinging to feelings from the past? Do you spend your time imagining positive feelings in the future? I was interested in finding the source text, so I kept digging, and I found one source. I don't know if it's the definitive source for the number 108 in a very old sutra, the Vedana Samyutta, that's from a large collection of sutras in the Pali Canon, part of the Tripitaka, 3 baskets of scripture that are foundational in Theravadan Buddhism. So let me read 2 verses from the Vedana Samyutta. The first one is about concentration. And the word bhikkhu is monk. So it says, bhikkhus, there are these 3 feelings. What 3? Pleasant feeling, painful feeling, and neither pleasant nor painful feeling. These are the 3 feelings. A disciple of the Buddha, mindful, concentrated, comprehending clearly, understands feelings and the origin of feelings, where they finally cease, and the path leading to their destruction. With the destruction of feelings, a bhikkhu is hungerless and fully quenched. So this verse echoes the 4 noble truths with feelings in place of dukkha. A disciple of the Buddha understands feelings, the cause of feelings, the cessation of feelings, and the path leading to their cessation. I'll read another one. This one is about abandonment. So it says, when bhikkhus, a bhikkhu has abandoned the underlying tendency to lust in regard to pleasant feeling, the underlying tendency to aversion in regard to painful feeling, and the underlying tendency to ignorance in regard to neither painful nor pleasant feeling, then he is called a bhikkhu without underlying tendencies, one who sees rightly. He has cut off craving, severed the fetters, and by completely breaking through conceit, he has made an end to suffering. The Vedana Samyutta has 31 sections that go on in this vein. Actually, one of them talks about the number 108. I won't read that one for you because it's actually quite long. But if you're interested, you can search for this sutra. But it examines different aspects of feelings, our lust for pleasant feelings, our aversion to pain, and as it says, our tendency to ignorance when we're indifferent. And in this sutra, over and over, the Buddha contrasts one who is ruled by their feelings with one who recognizes them as impermanent, conditioned, dependently arisen. One who recognizes that feelings arise from contact with sense objects and are the root of suffering. And as a result of this understanding, the Buddha praises the instructed noble disciple who understands the nature of feelings and who experiences feelings with equanimity. And when we chant the 4 vows, we chant the words, desires are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. So I wrestled with this text for a little while. It's an early Buddhist text, as I may have mentioned, and I realized that it was written before the great Prajna Paramita teachings that are actually the basis of our practice, before the Heart Sutra and the Diamond Sutra and the Platform Sutra and the Vimalakirti Sutra. And so it's emphasizing purification practices, purifying our minds. And there is a place for that. But I've always had difficulty with the idea that desires are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them, and I had difficulty with the wording in the Vedana Samyutta. And I realized, that these words, desires are inexhaustible, I vow to put an end to them, are a translation. It has a nice, short, sort of poetic ring to it. Um, but another translation might say unwholesome desires, or addictions, or obsessions. One translation I found reads, greed, hatred, and ignorance rise endlessly. I vow to abandon them. So that's very different, isn't it? It's easy to be tripped up by words. And so as I was just mulling this over, I realized I don't want to put an end to feelings or desire. If we put an end to all feelings or desire, we'd all be dead. This is not our practice. What would life be like without the joy of laughing with a friend? What kind of person would I be if I didn't feel sadness when I encounter suffering? And if I didn't deeply desire and work for the release of the suffering individual? Who would you be, or who would I be, if we had never loved or never been loved? So I remembered, actually, as I was working on this talk, an old song. It was a song called "Feelings," that was recorded by Morris Albert in 1975, which was the year I graduated from high school. So if you're of a certain age, you may remember this song. It starts like this: feelings, nothing more than feelings, trying to forget my feelings of love. Teardrops rolling down on my face, trying to forget my feelings of love. Do you remember how strong your feelings were in high school? Think back to those times. Your hormones are surging. You're so tired of doing what your parents told you to do. You don't have enough life experience to know who you are, and yet you are exactly who you are. I wouldn't want to go through those years again. But how strange and difficult and emotional and important those years are. And you may have seen me sort of, even though it's meant to be a love song, or, unrequited love or whatever, you may have seen me smiling a little bit as I was singing it, because the thing about this song, um, when I was in high school, we used to walk around singing this song at the top of our lungs, making a complete mockery of it. We were overwhelmed by how overwhelming our feelings were. And the only option we had was to pretend it was all a joke. Without our feelings, we would not be complete human beings. And then a little bit later, as I was thinking of this, I was reminded of Dylan Thomas's poem, to his dying father. And if you go back to these lines from the Vedana Samyutta, with the destruction of feelings, a bhikkhu is hungerless and fully quenched. Okay, yeah, I get it. But his father's dying. And he writes to his dying father, "Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at the close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light." When we sit, we connect with all that is: the winter stars and spring flowers, our joy and our sorrow. We aren't trying to numb ourselves. If you're trying to numb yourself, you're not practicing. We aren't trying to cut ourselves off from our feelings and from our lives. We're simply manifesting enlightenment. And we can sit with it all because we develop this deep faith in our Buddha nature. When we notice again and again the arising and falling away of each moment, we start to appreciate what each moment has to offer. When we notice again and again how we respond to the circumstances that arise in our lives, which responses cause suffering and which responses reduce suffering, we're able slowly to drop our attachments, to refrain from unwholesome actions, and to care for ourselves and others. After years of sitting with the Sangha, we learn to take refuge in Buddha, to take refuge in Dharma, and to take refuge in Sangha. We learn to not be pulled around by states of mind or objects of mind quite as much as we once were. And we learn to accept when we're grasping and being pulled around by states of mind or objects of mind. The true teaching about transcending difficult emotions is not to try to put an end to them, though we sometimes do this. The true teaching is to notice them and to recognize when we become attached to them, to recognize our clinging. It seems counterintuitive. Why would we cling to difficult emotions? But we do. And this is why we train. When we're sitting, if a thought arises, we notice it and we let it go. If desire arises, well, maybe we find ourselves chasing it and attaching to it. But the process of sitting inevitably means that we notice it and we let it go. Because, as it says in the Vedana Samyutta, it is impermanent, conditioned, and dependently originated. So I hope that you find the enumeration of 108 kleshas, or unwholesome states of mind that lead to unwholesome actions, to be useful. Maybe you'll notice that you're dwelling on a painful feeling from the past and you can let it go. Or maybe you're wasting a good part of your day fantasizing about a pleasant feeling in the future instead of actually doing anything to work towards that pleasant feeling. And you'll stop that. The teachings are really only useful when they're connected to your own experience. And to experience, you need to pay attention. As long as we're alive, we will feel. We will experience joy and pain. But a wholehearted practice can give us a sense of lightness in the midst of it all. One gift of practice is a sense of freedom. Not freedom from causes and conditions or the emotions that they give rise to. Freedom in the midst of causes and conditions and the emotions they give rise to. And there's no better example of this lightness, this freedom, this sense of playfulness than our dear friend Layman P'ang, who we're studying this practice period. I love the simple stories that we're reading about him. They actually don't tell us much about his path to becoming the mature practitioner that we're hearing about. But in these stories, what a delightful teacher P'ang is. He teaches without trying to teach us anything at all. So I'll end with one of the stories from the sayings of Layman P'ang. It's entitled "The Distance to the Mountaintop." And so here, there are a section of stories about the layman's interactions with a master named Qifeng. And so the distance to the mountaintop starts. On another day, the layman asked Qifeng, do you know how far it is from here to the top of the peak? And the commentary actually says that this question is a play on Qifeng's name, which means reaching the pinnacle or reaching the peak. So the layman asked Qifeng, do you know how far it is from here to the top of the peak? And Qifeng says, I'm not sure if you can really get there from here. Which I love that statement. I'm not sure you can get there from here. The layman said, if it were so awfully steep and treacherous, I wouldn't have asked you about it. And Qifeng says, well, you tell me how far it is. And the layman says, 1, 2, 3. And Qifeng says, 4, 5, 6. And the layman said, well, why not 7? And Qifeng says, well, you say 7 and I'll say 8. And the layman said, you've made it to the top. Qifeng says, I've finally amounted to something. And the layman and Qifeng both laughed and then went for a walk together. These two Zen practitioners, cavorting freely in the Dharma, just teasing each other, just enjoying a joke. Feelings, nothing more or less than feelings. One of the gifts of this precious human life.